productivity actually, while still taking some out of you, right? But if you feel productive, it actually builds energy.
People say, well, you enjoy your work because you're a CEO and you're of this organization. I said, do you think it's where I started? Many people see the outcome. I changed my perspective in junior high, and then school wasn't as much of a drudgery because I'm measuring my own productivity on the outcome.
What you do with your time has to be more purposeful.
And some of you, by virtue of changing perspective, it will change the job you're in.
Welcome back. We're glad you've returned for episode 3 of ReedFlections, podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I am Art Calderon. I'll be steering us through our conversation. My lifelong friend here, Reed Nyffeler. Reed, you're a husband and a father of 4. You lead a large, rapidly growing company headquartered here in the heartland of America. You have a lot of professional and personal experiences that you'd like to share with those. We've been talking a lot about the importance of setting priorities in our lives. Now, in episode 1 and 2, we talked about prioritizing God and prioritizing family. Today, we're going to talk about priority of productivity. You're pretty intentional about encouraging people to prioritize productivity over being busy. Talk a little bit about the difference.
Yeah, I think, the term busy, I think is really overused, right? I mean, I think, everyone will say I'm busy when many times they'll never say they're lazy. So, I mean, that's the alternative, right? And I think, and we'll say I'm going to work, right? And we can be at work and not be productive. I, as an employer, am paying for the productivity. So not the time, right? They could be there 8 hours, but if they don't produce anything, why would I compensate them for more? And so that's why my focus is on productivity. And I think the principle too is work, just by definition and how it's culturally characterized, it takes our energy. I got to go to work, right? We're lamenting it, or, oh, it was a tough day at work today. Right? Whereas if we're saying, hey, I was highly productive. Look at all the things I got done. We come home, we say, I completed this, and this, and this, and we get energy from that. And so work drains us, right? Productivity energizes us. Whereas productivity, we may be donating our time and being productive, right? We could be in a philanthropy and saying, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and we're productive in that environment. Or even with our free time, which is kind of our next priority, we can be productive with our free time and not be compensated. So I think part of the difference there is work is something that's kind of culturally defined as something you're going to be compensated for or is exhausting. Conversely, productivity is something that builds your energy and may or may not be compensated for depending on where you're applying that.
I think that's kind of a key point that you raised there, that work can be exhausting. We've all been there before. But productivity actually, while still taking some out of you, right? But if you feel productive, it actually builds energy.
Yeah. And I would say, how do you know which side you're on? If you're a clock watcher, you're focused on the work side. If you're leaving right at 5 o'clock or you arrive right at 8 o'clock. Whereas if it's 5:15, you're like, oh, it's after 5 o'clock. I need to get home to whatever the case might be. You're in that productive zone, right? Is time is less relevant. And you can see your mindset is associated with work. It's saying, I'm compensated to be here, and time is completely relevant. And whereas productivity is saying, if my energy is flowing in this productive environment. So even if it takes me 5 more minutes, I want to finish this activity that I'm working on because it's productive, or I'll continue this call I'm having with somebody else versus somebody that's leaving right at a particular period of time. And so that's where you can see where you're at. So if you are hyper-focused on the schedule holding you accountable, of course, we need schedule to be productive. Whereas if you're saying, I'm going to get today and these are the things I want to produce, you're more productively minded. And so that's kind of the starting point for this, is really saying, am I really work-oriented and I need to adjust to say, wait, I'm exhausted, I dread going into work, and maybe you need to find a new environment for that. Or conversely saying, I'm going to be highly productive today, and these are the things I want to accomplish within the allotted time. And that's the way to look at it on a productivity
Because it
basis.
is a fine line, and I'm not sure how to find that line, but because having a job, working hard, it can turn into just your first priority.
Yeah.
Which we already talked about should not be your first priority.
Right.
But you get so caught up your identity, right? What do we ask somebody when we meet them? Oh, what do you do?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
all of a sudden your job becomes your identity, and it becomes your first priority over the other two we talked about, in our case, God and family.
Right.
So talk a little bit about what you learned about the priority of productivity and keeping that in that right priority for
Yeah.
you.
So I mean, our audience expands as we work through our priority, right? Our first priority is God and faith, right? And so that's one audience, you know. The second audience is our family, and many people that maybe in our case, we have 4 children. My family's a size of 6, and then extended family. So again, a small group, but I mean, there's thousands of employees on in a work environment. So that's by nature more conditional love and support because it's conditional. What did you produce for me now? You know, in a family, it's unconditional, and God is certainly unconditional. Now it's conditional. And so that pivot. So that if we are focused on conditional outcomes driving our priorities, that will then drive our priorities. Because if we turn in a paper if we're productive in school and we turn in that paper, the teacher's going to give us a grade and say, hey, this is highly productive. Congratulations. You studied hard and used your time accordingly and you produced on that side. Or we go into work and we have a project there and we're focused on turning that in for the sake of the affirmation or people pleasing side of that, but what are you sacrificing on the other side? And so, why is this our third priority? Is to then allow for us to be able to prioritize above, right? And so I think some of that's setting boundaries around productivity, right? And so, again, I think recognizing that I will never have something that would be detrimental to my family or my faith.
Mhm.
And so that's where, again, it has to be a third priority for that. So if, for example, work is drawing me away, I travel a lot for work, for example. And as I kind of mentioned in the previous podcast, I schedule my travel first around my family's activities. So I look at their schedule, their school schedule, et cetera. And so that's where then I schedule my travel and trips around that, building that. And so then we're saying, okay, how am I demonstrating this is my third priority? And so if I have free time, and I got this question this week, I said, what do you do in your free time? And we can say, well, this is the available job I have, but it sacrifices my family, meaning that, you know, the time they're available, I'm at work. And conversely, the time they're at school or their other commitments, I'm not available,
So
or
do you,
I'm free time.
you talk about free time. Do you, it sounds like, well, I know you're a very structured person in like everything you do. Do you ever have 2 hours in a day where there's nothing scheduled?
Yeah, I think I look at it that way, and I think that's low productivity in that regard. So even as we get to the fourth priority, which is rest, that should be scheduled because if you look at it and you never get to the point of rest, you're not going to be your full self for your other priorities. And so the priorities are not about um, diluting time or taking time away from the other one. It's how you prioritize your time. So if we look at our 168 hours a week, right? There is a component or a balance of rest, candidly, and that includes sleep and recovery, et cetera. But what happens is we have not managed our priorities well, and so we don't prioritize our time with God. And so then as a result, we don't get to it because that's the easiest one that he's going to give us the most unconditional love that we're not going to invest in. And then our family, back to the point I was making, is there's only a handful of people that are there, and we know they're going to be there regardless of if I spend time with them or not, typically, right? Conversely, is if I don't produce in a work sense or otherwise, then I don't have the availability there. So that's where that becomes naturally people can become a workaholic or the endorphins we get from producing, right? Some people, production might be getting a workout in. You know, they may say, feel productive when I run 10 miles,
Mm.
right?
Who are those people?
I don't know, but I believe they exist. We can find them
Somewhere
somewhere,
in the
somewhere.
museums. I don't know.
And so that's productivity, right? Saying I got 10 miles in today,
Yeah.
or I got a workout in today. That's productivity. But it was on your own volition, right? You decided to do that on your own, and so that's again productivity. And why? Because we feel like we accomplished something. One of the things my wife loves to do is even if she's finished a task, she still writes it on a little note and puts a little check mark next
I
to it.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it could be something as wake up today,
Uh-huh.
and then you woke up, and then afterwards you write that down and put a check mark. That is the endorphins we get from productivity. It
Uh-huh.
feels good to feel like we produce something, and you get energy around that just by the effect of writing that.
All right. Well, between the two of us, we've had a lot of jobs over the years. I know I have probably more than I should have. And initially, as a young man, you may have felt this as well. All I knew was I had to go. I needed to earn money, so I go get a job. Now, as I progressed in my career and with more priorities and more things pulling at me in different ways, I've learned that how you work, how you earn money, what you do with your time has to be more purposeful. So tell me a little bit about your experience with that in your different jobs, growing in your career to where you're at now.
Yeah, so I distinctly remember in junior high where I valued productivity. And ever since then, I've applied that to my life. And so I sat in class and I thought, wow, this is a waste of time. I'm writing
In junior
notes.
high, you were already,
Yes, absolutely. It was a focus at the time. I said, here's my choice. I can sit there and write down every word that teacher says and try to determine what's going to be on the test and try to get the best grades. And then ultimately it starts all over again the next day, the next semester, the next class, whatever it might be. Or what I can do is look at how I'm paying attention and hyper focus on the things that are relevant and would be of value. Listening, which was my principle around productivity. And so I'd say, wait a minute, they said this is going to be on the test. Okay, maybe I should listen to this and recall this more than just the other commentary where I'm copiously taking notes. And so then I began to see the tendencies of that teacher. And what happened was I was getting better grades faster. And that's essentially productivity. Instead of me writing everything down and trying to disseminate what made sense, what didn't make sense, read the entire books and chapters, I hyper focused on the things that would be the highest return, right? In a class setting, productivity is measured by the answers to the test and your ability to get those correct. So I looked at what are the line items there. So then that led to my first job. And then I sat there and I said, okay, what does this manager want from me?
So you were able to take that you discovered about the teacher, that same principle, and move it into a work environment.
Exactly right. So early jobs, one of my early jobs was I was working construction, as I kind of alluded to before, and I was on a block crew. Basically, we built basements. And so the productivity measurement, he got paid number of blocks per hour. And so then it was a matter of how many people block layers you could support. So if you could support one or two, then ultimately in that one or two, you'd be like, that's kind of the par for the course. But if I could have three people that only needed me as a laborer, that was worth it. So I remember starting that job and I was 14 years old. My dad dropped me off there and he said, okay, we're going to put you at minimum wage. And I believe at the time it was like $4.75.
Mm-hmm. Those are old days.
Those are the old days. But I had a productivity mindset. I would be there and I'd say, okay, I know how many blocks I can lay an hour, right? And I was just doing the math, counting, and I was watching them, and some were faster, some were slower. And so I need to help them a little bit faster than the others. So then I got my first paycheck and it was at $7.25. I go, I thought you hired me for $4.25 or 75 cents. And he goes, well, I can't justify paying you that low when you're my most productive laborer. I said, I'm 14. But he said, you're not waiting for them to ask. You're seeing what they need. And I said, well, that's obvious. You can see they need that there instead of them asking. And he said, that creates efficiency there. And so now here early in my career, I saw the value by a manager. And so maybe you're a manager and you want to encourage productivity.
And let me ask you, did you also learn a little bit about, I imagine not everybody was excited that this 14-year-old got a $3 raise on day one, right? And these are adults that you're working with.
So again, I think that you walk into that environment, and I remember distinctly they're saying, dude, you're going to wear yourself out. Stop working so hard. You're making us look bad.
Your coworkers are telling you this.
Of course, right? And I'm saying, I'm not measured by your comments. So by the end of that summer, to continue this story, I had found more efficiencies. And one of the things he told me very early, he said, what are you doing? I was walking out to go to break, right? And so we'd get breaks. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm walking out to break. He said, do you see all the stuff that's here? It also needs to be up there. So every time you leave, take something that needs to go there. And I was like, that's true. We have productivity two directions. We have productivity on our way to work, right? And what do we need to do? What are our thoughts? Because I even apply this later in life. I'm thinking on my way to work. I'm thinking in those moments that would otherwise be idle time. And likewise on our way back. That was an early indication that, wait, a boss values productivity. So if I am getting rewarded in the form of compensation for productivity, how can I become more productive? And so then as I progressed through, I went to college. And in college, I'm like, okay, what jobs value productivity? And to me, what I recognized quickly was sales, because it's commission-based. In fact, that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. One job I took was commission sales, and I would go and sell advertising to these locations. And I took that productivity to another level because, one, I knew how many leads I could go to on a regular basis. But then I'm saying,
you were still in college at this time?
Yeah, freshman year.
Yeah.
I looked at the job that was commission-based because I said, productivity is measured or valued here. And so then I was there saying, okay, now I'm managing my time because I'm not paid per hour. I'm paid per result, productivity. And so I said, okay, who are the target lists of people that would be ideal for this coupon? And so I'd go to pizza places, and I knew the pizza places were trying to target those college students. And so they gave $1 off coupon. If it was redeemed, I would get it back on the other side. So I'm saying, okay, they would be a buyer that the college students would do. And places that were by proximity, I'd look at it and say, okay, students are not going to drive 20 minutes away. So it's all, 3 to 5 minutes away. And I said, okay, how can I be more productive with my language? If it takes me 15 minutes to go through the presentation, how can I get that down to 10? How can I engage them
Tell
to
them about your sales presentation.
my sales presentation, right? As I'm talking to them, saying, what are they responding to and what can I eliminate? They're already decided they want to do this, and how do we accelerate that? Because everybody's time is valued on productivity. So all those are early techniques on how to be productive. And then that led to the early jobs after graduation in college. And so when I graduated from college, I worked for a multinational Fortune 100 company. And at that Fortune 100 company, my manager gave me a goal. And to me, this is your productivity measure. Here is your sales goal and your productivity measure. And so then I said, okay, what would lead to that? And so I literally had the state of Nebraska and half of South Dakota for the year. I mapped out where I went. I drove 70,000 miles. And I timed productivity around the meetings of when I thought that potential buyer would be most interested. They're not going to be interested.
How did you learn? How did you even know that? You're a kid right out of college. Did you have a mentor? Did you have another salesperson who's already doing it? How did you learn all this stuff?
So I'm responding to the affirmation of leaders along that way. Back to my teacher, my first employer. I won the National Sales Award for that college coupons because they're valuing productivity. And I realized the world values productivity. And let's look at this as a consumer, right? If we go and we hire someone to wash our windows and they only wash half of them, are we going to give them a full pay? No. As a consumer, we pay for productivity, right? We're saying that's too much energy expansion. I'd rather expend that energy on something else. And conversely, I'm like, I'm going to give 100% energy, right? And even if we look at entertainers, if we look at entertainers and their investment, the ones that are the highest productive, it's not because their songs are longer. It's because they're giving you more value in that period of time. Money is an exchange for productivity, not for time. So that drove me to that outcome.
Did you start learning that there's going to be a cost that you need to step up and say, okay, I'm willing to take that?
Yeah, that's why priorities matter, right? Because if I am working for my peers, if my work is my priority, if those people, that my manager is my priority, then what they say just weighs heavy on me. I get overwhelmed or I get distracted. I could just be like, oh, my boss thinks poorly of me, but that's not my priority. I'm saying, okay, am my family proud of the productivity that I produce? Because that's a priority above productivity. And so am I providing for them through my productivity an environment that we can have the family environment that I was hoping for? And then next, am I doing it with all my heart, right? That's what God calls me. Am I giving 100% commitment? That's what I'm working towards, right? Not for the acclaim of man, which is the trap. And that's why we know we have all these people to appeal to. So then no matter what they said, it didn't matter.
If you're in line with the creator of the universe, doesn't really matter what.
I would say that aligns all of us, right? I mean, I wasn't put on this earth by my own volition,
and
right?
You know, one of the things I've learned just watching you lead is that, you're leading an organization that has thousands of employees. And even if you did everything right, best day, best CEO ever, someone's going to disagree. But how do you find the fortitude to be able to keep doing your job and not let that bring you down all the time?
Yeah. And, one of the analogies that I often use that's referring to that is bottled water. Because when I was growing up, there's water and that was fine. I could go drink from a hose and I was fine. But if you go and take
can't do that anymore.
You can't do that anymore. But if you ask 5 people, what bottled water do you want? And you give them a preference. I mean, we're talking about the most basic resource. You get 5 different answers.
Yeah.
So now, who are you going to upset? So if we're working for, and some of the audience probably needs to hear this, is don't work for man. That's why that's our third priority. We need to be productive, and I'm working ultimately for God. And he's saying, hey, you gave it 100%. Back to what I said about family, and the greatest time to see that there is they gave 100%, whether they won or lost, they gave 100%. And that's what I'm looking for as their parent.
And wouldn't you say that if your first priority is in line, if you're right with the Lord, if your relationship with God is where it should be, it'll be reflected in the relationships, all these other ones, your family, your workplace, your productivity environment.
That's right.
If you go to your productivity environment and it's nothing but conflict all the time,
right,
maybe it's time to look at the first and second priorities. Maybe something's off there.
That's
Would
right.
you agree?
Yeah, I think to your point, there's 2 things that bring to work, you and the employer. Many people just evaluate the employer and say, I can't work here. It's a terrible place, everything else. But are you a good employee? Right? A lot of my professional work is around people going to work for themselves. And I said, you are starting a business, but you're also potentially hiring a terrible employee, and that could be you. I mean, I think the reality of it is you are the employer of yourself. And many people leave work because they're like, I can't work here, and saying, okay, that's the last 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. I can tell you right now, the employers are not colluding against that employee and saying, hey, don't hire this guy, because they don't have time to do that.
What's the common denominator there?
You, right? I mean, in every environment. And I always tell people this when I'm talking to college students. I said, I can tell you that 50% of your life, I already know what's going to be in it, you. So if you're only working on the external things that are going to change instead of the internal things yourself, you're bringing that everywhere you go. You're bringing that to your faith, your family, your productivity, to your other environment. And if it's repelling people away, maybe you need to take a look inside. If every manager is giving you the same feedback, they're not colluding.
Right.
It's something you're saying or driving that activity. And that's exactly where productivity was in my life. I said, okay, they're all asking for me to produce. That's what they're asking me to do. And they're going to compensate me accordingly. How can I, before they ask, be more productive?
Yeah.
And so that is how I manage my energy and time, including starting in grade school and junior high.
Now, let's bring this a little bit full circle. Initially, when we started out, we talked about productivity bringing us energy and joy versus work just being kind of a drudgery and dragging us down. Talk a little bit more as we start to close up here about energy and joy that comes from not just working, not just being busy, but being productive.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's in us out of our, even at infancy, right? One of your grandchildren in a couple of years shows you the paper they produced, right? It could be a terrible drawing, but they created it on their own.
I bet it'll be amazing, though. But yes,
That's
I see your
right.
point. I see your point.
Yeah, and so we as humans value productivity. But then what happens is we get a little bit older, and then you're like, oh, that's not good enough. You could have done this, change this color, right? At some point, we're no longer doing it for the sake of productivity. We're doing it for the sake of the audience. And so that is where it becomes fatigue, because we can never measure up, right? But if you see these artists that are just in themselves, they have a headset on and they're just in the product, they're in their best self because they're in the zone, for lack of a better term. Why? Because the audience is not who they're doing it for. Right. And they can get caught up in that. And so that's where I think the manifestation of productivity that we're designed for, it becomes performance. Right. And when it's our performance for someone else, and that's why priorities are critical, we get fatigued from that because it's never enough.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as the game is over, they're like, when's the next game? I just put all my energy into this. I mean, even as I watch championship sports, like, how are you set up for next year? I mean, here they just won. They come off the court, they're exhausted, and they're saying, now, do you going to keep the team together? And you're going to win another championship? And can we buy season tickets?
Never enough.
Never enough, right? And I think that's what performance is, and that leads to fatigue. Like, that wears me out, right? And so, however, the people that truly have energy, they're not doing it for performance sake. They're doing it for productivity and saying, I enjoy this. I've chosen this. It's working towards that, and fatigue is not, it doesn't affect me to the same degree because it's something I'm doing. And that's what I'm driven by, right? In my work environments, is to say, is it going to change someone's life? Not because it did, because I am trying to even be more efficient in my communication, even in the form of this podcast, to say, can someone else take this back and have a more productive life that would give them more time and productivity with their family, that ultimately would be for the sake of working for God, so that they can say, you know what, my perspective after this podcast changed about work and productivity, so that I'm not bringing my worst self home because I'm exhausted, right?
Yeah.
So that reminds me of a story, and then I know we can kind of progress here. But there was a back to a brick labor. This is a story that's not mine, but there was a guy that came up and said, "What are you doing?" And the first guy said, "Oh, I'm laying bricks." The second guy said, "Oh, I'm building a church." The third guy said, "I'm building a building that will change lives." Now, they're all three doing the same thing. What changed their perspective? And some of you, by virtue of changing your perspective, it will change the job you're in.
Right.
And that's what's been historically for me. People say, well, you enjoy your work because you're a CEO and you're of this organization. I said, do you think it's where I started? Many people see the outcome. I changed my perspective in junior high, and then school wasn't as much of a drudgery because I'm saying, I'm measuring my own productivity on the outcome.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our program. Reed, once again, thank you very much for sharing with us. We talked about prioritizing productivity. I want to thank all the listeners for joining ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. Next time, we're going to be prioritizing enjoyment and rest. I think I might enjoy that. Yes, I might rest before I get here for that. Until then, get out there and be purposeful. I'm Art Calderon saying, have a good day.
And now for the last word, Art, I know this is your favorite part. Some of you are out there, and I think you are looking at others to, one, tell you what to do, and or two, measure your productivity. Maybe you need to evaluate and say, hey, who am I productive for? Do I need to realign my priorities? Number one. And then number two is value productivity. If you value productivity, you get that endorphin from valuing productivity, and do so in alignment with your priorities. So evaluate your attitude in your environments and value productivity, and you'll be much better for it. So thank you, Art, and we will see you guys the next podcast.